What's up, bipeds? So is the thrust a must? This is something that's often said mainly by Brett Contreras, and in this video we're going to look at the benefits and drawbacks of including the hip thrust in your training program. So first of all, what is a hip thrust? There's a few different variations, but the main basic one is you have your back on a bench, your feet on the ground, the barbell near the family jewels, as it were, and then you are simply thrusting the hips upwards, doing loaded hip extension. Now, there are various other machines that you can load nowadays. These are sort of been made in the past 5 or 10 years. You can also do it with your back on the ground, which is usually known as a glute bridge, and this allows you to shorten the range of motion even further and use more weight. This is primarily a glute exercise. The hamstrings are definitely involved to help stabilize and to help extend the hips. The quadriceps are also involved in order to get a little bit of knee extension, and the spinal erectors are also involved just to stabilize and to keep the torso from bending. But it is primarily a glute exercise. No one does hip thrust for anything except the glutes. So right away, we can see that if your goal is not to build the glutes, the thrust is absolutely not a must. But if that is your goal, it might be. First, let's talk about the benefits, the positives of the hip thrust. First, it's very, very stable. It's not really a free weight movement. I mean, it is to a certain extent, but not nearly as much as a squat or a deadlift, where you can move in any direction.
But they'll never take
weights.
It's actually probably closer to a leg extension in terms of free weightness compared to those other compound movements. You can't move your feet are fixed on the ground, ideally. You can't move your back is pretty much securely on the bench, or at least it should be, and you're just thrusting up. Okay, there's only really one path that your hips can go. And this makes it so that it's very, very hard to fuck up. And that's a good thing. I've seen plenty of horrible squats and deadlifts, and even lunges and Bulgarian split squats, but I haven't seen any truly terrible hip thrusts. Some are better than others, but it's hard to really mess up on a grand scale. So it's easy to learn. You can take a beginner, day one, plop them under a barbell, and get to thrusting. Also, compared to most lower body movements that also target the glutes, it's more surgical. It's more focused on those honey buns. So you're going to get less leg development for more glute development. So especially if you're a woman who doesn't want big legs, you just want to build the cake, this is a very, very good option. Also makes it possible to work around injuries. If you have a messed up knee, squats might be off the table. If you have a messed up lower back, squats and probably deadlifts as well are also going to be very, very tricky. But for the hip thrust, this is less of an issue, especially with the knees. With lower back, maybe you might have to go lighter, but it is fairly injury friendly. And I want to make it clear that spinal loading is one of those things that's often needlessly vilified, but if you have an issue already, you're going to have to work around that, and hip thrusts might be a good option. They also do have quite constant tension on the glutes, unlike almost every other movement. A deadlift, you kind of lose tension at certain points in the range of motion where it's more hamstrings or more upper back or more lower back or more quads or something like that. For the squat, you get a lot of activation out of the bottom position, but near the top, there's no resistance at all. Just standing there in a squat, the glutes are not really under tension whatsoever. And this means that the hip thrust or the glute bridge, they are a very fine complement
How you doing?
to these movements because you're loading that contracted position. Also do seem to be quite promising for improving horizontal broad jump performance as well as sprinting, which makes sense if you look at the mechanics of what sprinting is. You are pushing back with your glutes. You're not jumping up. It's not a vertical movement. It's a horizontal movement, which is close to what the glute bridge and hip thrust are. Now, that being said, I think Brett has made some pretty ridiculous claims, saying that Usain Bolt could be faster if he hip thrusted. Yeah, that's a pretty big claim considering he's the fastest man in history. Saying that Andy Bolton could have deadlifted more if he added in the hip thrust, that kind of thing. Now let's talk about the drawbacks. First, the absolute load that you have to use. I am stupidly strong on glute bridges in particular. I've used 320 kilos. I think I did it for a triple. I've done 300 kilos for 7. And that is an annoyingly large amount of weight. You can get very, very, very strong on this movement or these movements if you do them regularly. And some people might view that as a positive. I view it as a negative. You have to lug across all the plates in the gym. At my old gym, I was literally using every 20 kilo plate in the gym. Every single one. I mean, if you go into the gym and you see someone else doing anything with the 20 kilo plates, you're just like, well, guess I'm not hip thrusting, because you can't use smaller plates because it doesn't even fit on the bar. Plus, when you're using that heavy of weights, obviously a bar pad is essential, but even then, it can get pretty uncomfortable. Another drawback for some people is that they feel like it's kind of an awkward movement. You're there just thrusting away. Don't mind me, just humping the sky. But I would say overall this needs to go away. Think about it. You're humping the sky. In a squat or a deadlift, you're just humping horizontally towards other people. Hey, baby. You want to see my total? It also does have a pretty low range of motion, and you're not really getting a stretch in the bottom position at all, because the ground gets in the way. You can sort of load things up where, maybe your feet are elevated, your back is elevated even more, and therefore you're getting, more range of motion in the bottom position, but it makes it sort of a challenge to set up. Are you really going to spend 20 minutes setting up a hip thrust situation every time? Probably not worth it. And we do know that that loaded stretch in that elongated position is very, very important for muscle growth. And this explains why a full squat is much better for glute growth than a half squat. So when Brett Contreras compares a half squat to the hip thrust, I find that to be a little bit disingenuous, because you probably shouldn't be doing half squats in the gym anyway, and that's not really a fair comparison. So plot twist, Barbalho et al. In 20 something or other, they found that a full squat was actually better than a barbell hip thrust for glute development. Plot twisted back again, they almost certainly fabricated the majority of their data. Wow, what a wild ride. I'll have a video on that at some point. Another drawback is that it should have very, very little carryover to your squat and to your deadlift. When I first started hip thrusting or glute bridging, I went from 160 kilos, so 350-ish pounds, up until 320 kilos for 3 reps. This was quite a bit of hip thrusting at first, and then very sporadically after that, because I just didn't really notice any carryover. I did notice glute growth, but I don't really need any more cake. Let's be serious. I'm full of cake. And my squat and deadlift did go up during that time, but it was not a 1-to-1 ratio. It wasn't even a 1-to-10 ratio. So don't expect this to have huge carryover to your powerlifting. And in fact, almost no powerlifters actually focus on this movement. Very, very few. If you poll, 100 of the top powerlifters in history, how many of them are doing the hip thrust regularly? Not very many. So when Brett says, oh, these guys would be way stronger at the deadlift and squat if they just thrust it away, I don't agree with this whatsoever. I think that it's a very easy movement to do, and if it really just blew your squat and deadlift up, powerlifters would be doing it. Powerlifters will do almost anything to put poundage on their total. And I would say if you want to build your glutes, this is a great option. Just don't expect it to blow up your other lifts. And you can do both squats and lunges and split squats as well as hip thrusts, and they complement each other very, very well. You don't have to choose just one. Whenever someone sends me a DM like, which is better, this movement or this movement, there's almost no reason that you can't do both.
Thank you.
Get off my lawn.
So do both, or do one, or do neither, or do none of them, okay? Do whatever you want to do. Your training is up to you based on your goals. It's a good movement, but don't blow it out of proportion. Anyway, if you want the full details about hip thrust as well as hundreds of other movements, definitely grab a copy of my book. It will help you a lot in your fitness journey. Also, like, subscribe, share, do YouTube stuff. Just start mashing buttons down there. Just really start clicking away. And I will see you in the next video. Too much coffee. Wow. Peace.